In this lecture, we're going to continue the data analysis example that we started in part one. If you recall, we laid down kind of a list of steps that generally one might take when doing a data analysis. And previously, we talked about the first roughly half of these steps. And in this lecture, we're going to talk about the remaining half. So this includes exploratory data analysis, statistical prediction and modeling, interpretation, challenging your results, synthesizing and writing up the results, and creating reproducible code. So if you recall, the basic question was, can I automatically detect emails that are spam or not? And a slightly more concrete version of this question that can be used to translate into a statistical problem was, can I use quantitative characteristics of the emails to classify them as spam or ham? So our data set, again, was from this UCI machine learning repository, which had already been cleaned up. And it was available in the KernLab package as a data set. So this data set had 4,600 observations or emails that had been kind of characterized along 58 different variables. So the first thing we need to do with this data set, if we want to build a model to kind of classify emails into spam or not, is that we need to split the data set into a test set and a training set. So the idea is that we're going to use part of the test of the data set to build our model, and then we're going to use another part of the data set, which is independent of the first part, to actually determine how good our model is at kind of making the prediction. So here, I'm taking a random half of the data set. So I'm flipping a coin with the R-binom function to generate a random kind of coin flip with probability of half. So that'll separate the data set into two pieces. So you can see that roughly 2,314 are going to be in one half, and 2,287 will be in the other half. And so the training set will be one set, and the test set will be another set of data. So the first thing we're going to want to do is a little bit of exploratory data analysis. We have not looked at this data set yet, and so it'd be useful to look at kind of what did the data look like. What's the distribution of the data? What are the relationships between the variables? Things like that. So we want to look at basic summaries, one-dimensional, two-dimensional summaries of the data. We want to check for is there any missing data? Why is there missing data? If there is, create some exploratory plots and do a little kind of exploratory analyses. So if we look at the training data set, so that's what we're going to focus on right now as we do our exploratory analysis, as we build our model. All of that's going to be done in the training data set. And if you look at the column names of the data set, you can see that they're all just words, essentially. And if you look at the first 5 rows, we can see that basically these are the frequencies of which they occur in a given email. So you can see that the word make does not appear in that first email, and the word mail does not appear. So things like that. So these are all basically frequency counts or frequencies of words within each of the emails. So if we look at the training data set and look at the outcome, we see that 906 of the emails are classified as spam, and the other 1381 are classified as non-spam. So this is what we're going to use to kind of build our model for predicting the spam emails. We can make some plots so we can compare. So what are the frequencies of certain characteristics between the spam and the non-spam email. So here we're looking at a variable called capital AV, so the average number of capital letters. And you can see that it's difficult to look at this picture because the data are highly skewed. And so in these kinds of situations, it's often useful to just kind of take a look at the log transformation of the variable. So here, I'm going to take the base 10 log of the data set, the variable, and compare them to spam and non-spam. And since there are a lot of zeros in this particular variable, taking the log of 0 doesn't really make sense. So we'll just add 1 to that variable just so we can take the log and kind of get a rough sense of what the data look like. Typically, you wouldn't want to just add 1 to a variable just because, but since we're just exploring the data, like making kind of exploratory plots, it's okay to do that in this case. So here you can see rather obviously that the spam emails have a much higher rate of these capital letters than the non-spam emails, and if you've ever seen spam emails, you're probably familiar with that phenomenon. And so that's one useful relationship to see there. We can look at kind of pairwise relationships between the different variables in the plots. And here I got a pairs plot of a few of the variables, and this is the log transformation of each of the variables. And you can see that some of them are correlated, some of them are not particularly correlated, and so that's useful to know. So we can explore the predictor space a little bit more by doing a hierarchical cluster analysis. And so this is a first cut at trying to do that with the hclust function in R. And you can see I plotted the dendrogram just to see kind of what predictors or what words or characteristics tend to cluster together. And it's not particularly helpful at this point, although it does separate out this one variable, capital total. But if you recall that the clustering algorithms can be sensitive to any skewness in the distribution of the individual variables. So it may be useful to redo the clustering analysis after a transformation of the predictor space. So here I've taken a base 10 log transformation of the predictors in the training data set. And again, I've added 1 to each one just so to avoid taking the log of 0. And now you can see that it's a little bit more interesting. The dendrogram, that is separated out a few clusters. This capital average is one kind of cluster all by itself. There's another cluster that includes you, will, or your. And then there are a bunch of other words that kind of lump more ambiguously together. And so this may be something worth exploring a little bit further if you see some particular kind of characteristics that are interesting. So once we've done exploratory data analysis, we've looked at some univariate and bivariate plots, we did a little cluster analysis. We can move on to doing a more sophisticated statistical model and some prediction modeling. And so any statistical modeling that you engage in should be informed by your kind of question that you're interested in, of course, and the results of any exploratory analysis. The exact methods that you employ will depend on the question of interest. And when you do statistical modeling, you should account for the fact that the data have been processed or transformed if they have in fact been so. And as you do statistical modeling, you should always think about what are the measures of uncertainty, what are the sources of uncertainty in your data set. So here we're going to just do a very basic statistical model. What we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the variables in the data set and try to fit a generalized linear model, in this case a logistic regression, to see if we can predict whether an email is spam or not by using just a single variable. So here I'm using the reformulate function to create a formula that includes the response, which is just the kind of type of the email, and one of the variables in the data set. And we're just going to cycle through all the variables in this data set using this for loop to build a logistic regression model. And then subsequently calculate the cross-validated error rate of predicting spam emails from a single variable. And so if you run this loop in R, it may take a little bit to run. But because it has to loop through all the variables to fit all the models. So once we've done this, we're going to try to figure out, well, which of the individual variables has the minimum cross-validated error rate. And so we can just take this vector of results, this CV error, and just figure out which one is the minimum. And it turns out that the predictor that has the minimum cross-validated error rate is this variable called char dollar, which is an indicator of the number of dollar signs in the email. So just keep in mind this is a very simple model. Each of these models that we fit only has a single predictor in it. And so of course we could maybe think of something more complicated, but this may be an interesting place to start. So if we take this best model from this set of 55 predictors, this is this char dollar variable, and I'll just refit the model again right here. And so this is a logistic regression model. We can actually make predictions now from the model on the test data set. So recall that we split the data set into two parts and we built the model on the training data set. And so now we're going to predict the outcome on the test data set to see how well we do. And so in a logistic regression, we don't get specific predictions out of 0-1 classifications of each of the messages. We get a probability that a message is going to be spam or not. And so then we have to take this continuous probability, which ranges between 0 and 1, and determine at what point, at what cutoff, do we think that the email is spam. And so we're just going to draw the cutoff here at 0.5. So if the probability is above 50%, we're just going to call it a spam email. So once we've created our classification, we can take a look at the predicted values from our model and then compare them with the actual values from the test data set, because we know which was spam and which was not. And here's the classification table that we get from the predicted and the real values. And we can just calculate the error rate. And so the mistakes that we made are on the off-diagonal elements of this table, so 61 and 458. So 61 were classified as spam that were not actually spam, and 458 were classified as non-spam but actually were spam. And so if we calculate this error rate, it's about 22%. So now that we've done the analysis, we've calculated some results, we calculated our kind of best model, we've looked at the error rate that's produced by that model. So now we need to interpret our findings, and it's important when you interpret your findings to use appropriate language and to not use language that goes beyond the analysis that you actually did. And so you want to be, if you're in this type of application where we're just looking at some data, we're building a predictive model, you want to use words like prediction, or it correlates with, or certain variables may be associated with the outcome, or the analysis is descriptive. Just to think about carefully what kind of language you use to interpret your results. It's good to give an explanation. So if you can think of why certain models predict better than others, it'd be useful to kind of give an explanation of what you think that is. If there are coefficients in the model that you need to interpret, it's useful, you can do that here. And in particular, it's useful to bring in measures of uncertainty to kind of calibrate your interpretation of the final results. So in this example, we might think of stating that the fraction of characters that are dollar signs can be used to predict if an email is spam. Maybe we decide that anything with more than 6.6% dollar signs is classified as spam. More dollar signs always means more spam under our prediction model. And for our model in the test data set, the error rate was 22.4%. So once you've done your analysis and you've developed your interpretation, it's important that you yourself challenge all the results that you found. Because if you don't do it, someone else is going to do it once they see your analysis, and so you might as well get one step ahead of everyone by doing it yourself first. And so it's good to challenge the whole process by which you've gone through this problem. The question itself, is the question even a valid question to ask? Where the data came from, how you got the data, how you processed the data, how you did the analysis, and any conclusions that you drew. If you have measures of uncertainty, are those the appropriate measures of uncertainty? And if you built models, why is your model the best model? Why is it an appropriate model for this problem? How did you choose the things to include in your model? So all these things are questions that you should ask yourself and should have a reasonable answer to, so that when someone else asks you, you can respond in kind. And also, it's useful to think of potential alternative analyses that might be useful. It doesn't mean that you have to do those alternative analyses in the sense that you might stick to your original just because of other reasons. But it may be useful to try alternative analyses just in case they may be useful in different ways or may produce better predictions. Once you've interpreted your results, you've done the analysis, you've interpreted the results, you've drawn some conclusions, you've challenged all your findings, you're going to need to synthesize the results and write them up. So synthesis is very important because typically in any data analysis, there are going to be many, many, many things that you did. And when you present them to another person or to a group, you're going to want to have to winnow it down to the kind of most important aspects and to tell a coherent story. And so typically you want to lead with the question that you were trying to address. If people understand the question, then they can draw up a context in their mind and have a better understanding of the framework in which you're operating. And so that will lead to what kinds of data are appropriate for this question, what kinds of analyses would be appropriate. And so you can summarize the analyses as you're telling the story. It's important that you don't include every analysis that you ever did, but only if it's needed for kind of telling a coherent story. It's useful to sometimes keep these analyses in your back pocket, though, even if you don't talk about it, because someone may challenge what you've done, and then it's useful to say, well, we did do that analysis, but it was problematic because of whatever the reason may be. It's important to order the analyses that you did according to the story that you're telling. And often that order is not the same as the order in which you actually did the analyses. So it's usually not that useful to talk about the analyses that you did kind of chronologically or the order in which you did them, because the order in which you did them is often very scattered and kind of doesn't make sense in retrospect. So talk about the analyses of your data set in the order that's appropriate for the story that you're trying to tell. And when you're telling the story or you're presenting it to someone or to a group, it's useful to include kind of very well done figures so that people could kind of understand what you're trying to say in one picture or two. So in our example, the basic question was, can we use quantitative characteristics of the emails to classify them as spam or ham? Our approach was, rather than try to get the ideal data set from all of Google's servers, so we collected some data from the UCI machine learning repository and created training and test sets from this data set. We explored some relationships between the various predictors. We decided to use a logistic regression model on the training set and chose our kind of single variable predictor by using cross-validation. When we applied this model to the test set, it was 78% accurate. So the interpretation of our results was that basically more dollar sign seemed to indicate that an email was more likely to be a spam, and this seems reasonable. We've all seen emails with lots of dollar signs in them trying to sell you something, and so this is kind of both reasonable and understandable. Of course, the results were not particularly great, as 78% test set accuracy is not that good for most prediction types of algorithms, and we probably could do much better if we included more variables, or if we included a more sophisticated model, maybe a nonlinear model. And for example, why did we use logistic regression? We could have used a much more sophisticated type of modeling approach. But anyway, these are the kinds of things that you want to outline to people as you go through data analysis and you present it to other people. So finally, the thing that you want to make sure of is that you document your analysis as you go. You can use things like tools like R Markdown and Knitter and RStudio to kind of document your analyses as you do them, and so you can preserve the R code as well as any kind of written summary of your analysis in a single document using Knitter. And to make sure that all of what you do is reproducible by either yourself or by other people, because ultimately that's the standard by which most kind of big data analyses will be judged. If someone cannot reproduce it, then the conclusions that you draw will be not as worthy as an analysis where the results are reproducible. So try to stay organized. Try to kind of use the tools for reproducible research to keep things organized and reproducible, and that will make the evidence for your conclusions much more powerful.